Picture this, it's the early 1800s. One man, Napoleon Bonaparte, has Europe trembling at his feet. His armies are unstoppable, a relentless tide sweeping across the continent. From the sun-baked fields of Spain to the frozen plains of Russia, nations fall before his grande armée. It seems like nothing can stop him. He is the master of the land. But there's one stubborn island nation that refuses to bow: Great Britain. Napoleon knows that to truly conquer Europe, he must conquer Britain. He gathers a massive invasion force, the Army of England, over 200,000 elite soldiers, poised and ready on the coast of France. They can practically see the white cliffs of Dover. The plan is simple, audacious, and totally Napoleonic. Cross the English Channel, land his army, and march on London. Victory would be swift. But there's a big, blue, watery problem standing in his way: the English Channel. And guarding that channel is the most powerful and formidable naval force the world has ever seen: the British Royal Navy. Napoleon, a genius on the battlefield, understands a crucial truth. Let us be masters of the channel for 6 hours, and we are masters of the world. 6 hours, that's all he needs. To get those 6 hours, he needs to get rid of the Royal Navy, lure them away, defeat them, anything to clear the path. So, he hatches a complex plan. His French fleet, combined with their Spanish allies, will break out from their blockaded ports, sail across the Atlantic to the West Indies, and create a massive distraction. This would pull the British fleet, led by the legendary Admiral Horatio Nelson, into a wild goose chase across the ocean. While the British are gone, the combined Franco-Spanish fleet will race back to Europe, seize control of the Channel, and escort Napoleon's invasion barges across. It's a high-stakes gamble, a strategic chess move on a global scale. The French admiral in charge of this daring plan is Pierre-Charles Villeneuve. He successfully breaks the British blockade of Toulon and heads for the Caribbean as planned. Nelson, true to form, takes the bait and gives chase. So far, so good for Napoleon. But here's where things start to go wrong. Villeneuve is a capable admiral, but he's no Nelson. He's cautious, haunted by previous defeats, and deeply intimidated by the Royal Navy's reputation. After a few inconclusive maneuvers in the West Indies, a nervous Villeneuve decides to head back to Europe. But instead of making a beeline for the English Channel as ordered, he gets spooked. A minor clash with a British squadron off the coast of Spain rattles his confidence completely. Fearing a trap and believing Nelson is closing in, he makes a fateful decision. He disobeys Napoleon's direct orders and sails south to the safety of the port of Cadiz in Spain. When Napoleon hears the news, he is incandescent with rage. His grand invasion plan, years in the making, is in tatters. The window of opportunity has slammed shut. In a fury, he abandons his dream of conquering Britain, turns his back on the Channel, and marches his Grande Armée east to deal with his continental enemies, Austria and Russia. This would lead to one of his greatest land victories at Austerlitz, but his ultimate strategic goal was lost. Meanwhile, Admiral Villeneuve is trapped in Cadiz, blockaded by Nelson's fleet, which has now gathered its full strength. Villeneuve knows his career is over. He's received word that Napoleon is sending a replacement to relieve him of command. Humiliated and desperate to salvage some shred of honor, he decides on one last, desperate roll of the dice. Against his better judgment, and knowing the state of his fleet, he orders his combined Franco-Spanish force to sea, to face Nelson head. On the morning of October 21, 1805, off Cape Trafalgar on the southwest coast of Spain, the two greatest fleets in the world finally meet. The Franco-Spanish force is larger, with 33 ships of the line against Nelson's 27. On paper, they have the advantage. They form a traditional, long, crescent-shaped battle line, a formidable wall of cannon. Any conventional admiral would sail parallel to this line and engage in a massive, drawn-out gun duel. But Horatio Nelson is anything but conventional. He has a revolutionary, higher-risk, higher-reward plan. He will divide his smaller fleet into 2 columns and sail them directly at the enemy line, perpendicular to it. His goal is to punch through their formation at 2 points, shattering their line and creating a chaotic, close-quarters melee where British gunnery, training, and seamanship will reign supreme. It's an incredibly dangerous tactic. As his ships approach, they will be unable to fire their main broadside cannons, while the enemy can pound their bows with unrelenting fire. It's like running directly into a hailstorm of cannonballs. Nelson knows the risks. Aboard his flagship HMS Victory, he signals to the fleet, not a complex tactical order, but a message that would become one of the most famous in military history. England expects that every man will do his duty, as the two British columns, led by Nelson in the Victory and his second-in-command, Cuthbert Collingwood, in the Royal Sovereign, plough towards the enemy line. The scene is terrifying. The Franco-Spanish ships unleash a furious barrage. Masts splinter, sails are torn to shreds, and men fall. But the British ships press on, silent and determined. The Royal Sovereign is the first to break through, plunging into the heart of the enemy formation. "See how that noble fellow Collingwood carries his ship into action," Nelson exclaims. A few minutes later, his own flagship, the mighty Victory, smashes through the line between the French flagship Bucentaur and the colossal Spanish ship, Santísima Trinidad. The moment the British ships break the line, the battle dissolves into chaos, just as Nelson planned. It's no longer an orderly gun duel. It's a brutal, swirling brawl. Ship to ship cannot. The British crews, drilled to perfection, can fire 3 or 4 times faster than their opponents. Their gunnery is devastatingly accurate. Alliances of French and Spanish ships are isolated, surrounded, and systematically pummeled into submission. Aboard the Victory, Nelson is pacing the deck, directing the battle, a conspicuous figure in his admiral's uniform, adorned with all his medals. He refuses to cover them. Around 1:15 p.m., a French sharpshooter perched high in the rigging of the nearby ship Redoutable takes aim. A single musket ball strikes Nelson, passing through his shoulder, piercing his lung, and lodging in his spine. He falls to the deck. "They have done for me at last," he whispers. He is carried below deck to the surgeon's cockpit, a dark, grim place filled with the wounded and dying. But even as his life ebbs away, his mind is still on the battle. He demands constant updates. How goes the day? How goes the battle? On deck, the battle rages on. One by one, the French and Spanish ships are captured or destroyed. Their line is broken, their command structure shattered. Villeneuve's flagship, the Bucentaur, is dismasted and forced to surrender. Villeneuve himself is taken prisoner. By late afternoon, the outcome is no longer in doubt. It is a total, crushing, and absolute British victory. As Nelson lies dying, he is told of the triumph. He learns that 15, then 18, enemy ships have been taken. "That is, well," he murmurs, "but I had bargained for 20. His final moments are a mixture of professional duty and personal tenderness. "Thank God, I have done my duty," he says. His last words are "Kiss me, Hardy," spoken to his flag captain. Horatio Nelson, Britain's greatest naval hero, dies as his fleet secures its greatest ever victory. The Battle of Trafalgar was a catastrophe for Napoleon. In a single afternoon, he lost 22 ships, and over 14,000 men were killed, wounded, or captured. The British, remarkably, lost no ships and suffered only 1,700 casualties. The naval power of France and Spain was annihilated. It would not be a threat to Britain again for the rest of the war. The consequences were monumental. First and foremost, any hope of invading Britain was gone forever. The Royal Navy's control of the seas was now absolute and uncontested. Britain was safe. This maritime supremacy allowed Britain to not only defend itself, but to project its power globally, building a vast empire and funding the coalitions that would eventually bring Napoleon down. While Napoleon would go on to win more spectacular victories on land, he was now trapped on the continent. Historians call it the clash of the whale and the elephant. The elephant, Napoleon's army, was supreme on land. The whale, the Royal Navy, was supreme at sea, and neither could decisively defeat the other in its own element. Trafalgar forced Napoleon to change his strategy. Unable to invade Britain, he tried to defeat it economically through his continental system, a massive embargo designed to choke British trade. But this policy backfired spectacularly. It caused immense hardship across Europe, fueled smuggling, and ultimately led to his 2 fatal blunders: the disastrous invasion of Spain and the cataclysmic invasion of Russia in 1812. Both were driven, in part, by the need to enforce his failing continental system. So, while the final collapse of Napoleon's empire happened years later, on the battlefields of Leipzig and Waterloo, the seeds of that defeat were sown in the waters off Cape Trafalgar. The battle ensured that Britain would remain a persistent, untouchable, and well-funded enemy that Napoleon could never subdue. It guaranteed that sea power would ultimately triumph over land power. The echo of Trafalgar's cannons was the death knell for Napoleon's dream of total European domination. It was the naval disaster that doomed an empire. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this deep dive into history, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell for more stories like this one. See you next time.